Hi, Pastor Nathan Decker with your Better Together devotion for today. And I've been using some language, and it occurred to me as I've been using the language for this week's series of devotions that we might want to talk about some of that language. And one of them is I've been using the phrase ordinance and sacrament. And ordinance is just the old 1600s, 1700s language for something that was commanded. And so if you look to the scriptures, you'll see that Jesus asks us to go and make disciples of Jesus Christ, baptizing them. So it's a command from Jesus to go and do these things. He tells us to gather at the table. He also tells us, as an ordinance, just to be honest with y'all, that we should wash one another's feet. Go check John's Gospel for that. And all of us in the Protestant camp are going, oh, we don't do that often. But it's truly one of the things that Jesus commanded us to do. He gave us an order to do this. But I also mentioned the word sacrament, and I've talked about baptism and communion in that regard as sacraments, as ways that have been set aside, made sacra or holy, and they're places where we experience God's grace. Are they the only place that we experience God's grace? No, heavens and Betsy, no. But there are two places where God's grace is guaranteed within this. You're guaranteed to experience God. And one of the things that I've often told folks is that, we talk about, well, how's a baby experiencing God's love in baptism? Well, how's a baby experience love at all? When we're born, we're selfish as can be, but we experience love from our moms and our dads. And we learn to know what that feeling is as love and acceptance. And that's what happens at the table. That's what happens at the font. Sacrament and ordinance are just two of the phrases. There are some other words as well. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to, the table in particular has all kinds of words, but sometimes you'll hear at baptism, you'll hear baptism as the baptismal pool or the baptismal font. Both of which are talking about just water. It's a place where we have water. Sometimes it's a little bowl. Sometimes it's I've used a pail, kind of a big wash tub that had somebody stand in so I could pour water over them. That was the baptismal font for that day, but also a baptismal pool where we dunk folks. The church really doesn't matter that much. There is a writing called the Didache that almost made it in the scriptures, but if it's more teachings. It's not really, doesn't have that spiritual knock like the Holy Scriptures do, because all it does is tell us instructions on baptism and communion. Gives us the language that we use about communion, as well as gives us three different ways to do baptism. Immersion in living waters is preferred, meaning waters that are moving like a river or the ocean. Or dunking, or the immersion being dunking, or sprinkling or pouring could also be happening. That's what the Didache says, and that's where in church tradition that we get some of the different ways that we do baptism. The Lord's Supper or communion or the Eucharist, those are all words that we also use to talk about the Lord's table or coming to the table to receive the bread and the wine. We'll talk about wine a whole lot, even though we use grape juice sometimes. Just maintaining that historical narrative and understanding of what Jesus Christ himself would have used. For all those folks who think that Jesus only drank grape juice, well, it just didn't exist back then. It was wine. I'm saying all this to say that baptism and communion are onions. They have tremendous symbolism and tremendous power to us as the church, as places where we experience God's grace, places where God is showering God's grace, God is showering all of God's love for us to receive and to be better human beings, to be better creatures, to be better creations, to be better children of God. I hope this week's been fun for you as a journey into baptism and communion and sacraments and all of those things. I pray that you take a moment today to think about your life and how you are a sacrament. You are someplace. You are someone where God is making a difference. You are a part of God's movement of the Spirit to make heaven on earth. Go, disciple. Go, child of God. Go make a difference in the world so that the world can be better together. Amen.